Hello, fellow Darksiders. Today we will be doing another entry into our villain competency tier list, where in this episode we will be going over everyone's favorite rogue industrialist, techno-utopist madman, Carlton Drake, from the hit movie Venom, released in 2018 by Sony Productions. Carlton Drake is the most interesting, I'd say, entry we've had on this channel so far because um, unlike a lot of these characters that we've seen, like Emperor Bellows, Palpatine, Megatron, or the Prophet of Truth. He's a villain that, I'd say we could encounter in real life because a lot of his actions are derived from real world individuals, and a lot of his consequences and a lot of his mindsets can be derived from people of his wealth and status that exist in our world today. He's this very Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates type of person. Maybe like the corrupted dark version of that, or the normal version of that. If you hate Elon Musk, I'm not the only politics I care about on this channel are fictional politics, so don't come after me. But the point of the matter is, his wealth and the power that his wealth has accumulated for his benefit has made him very detached from the human race. And because of this detachment, he feels empowered to try and summon what is essentially a hostile alien race called the symbiotes down to Earth. He would retrieve them through this rocket that his company, the Life Foundation, has created. And once the symbiotes arrive onto Earth, they would forcibly convert the entire human population into willing or unwilling hosts for their bodies and essentially rule our planet unmitigated for however long they would. And Carlton Drake theoretically would be the head of this alien occupation force, not realizing that Riot, the person or the symbiote that's inhabiting his body, would be the true mastermind pulling the strings or whatnot. So, to examine Carlton Drake, we should really quickly look at his backstory before estimating his competency level, because his goal was pretty simple. It's not a very complex, layered thing. He wants to bring the symbiotes onto Earth, and he sees himself as the visionary, the herald for the next step in human evolution, which is conjoining with the symbiotes, which is becoming one with our alien overlords and evolving through the physical and mental attributes that they would bequeath upon us. Whether or not he's correct, again, that is not the goal of this channel. This channel and this series is merely meant to examine villains objectively regarding how close they were to achieving what they wanted. So, to start off with, Carlton Drake was born of British parents and he was immigrated to the United States at a very young age. And presumably during this time, he founded the Life Foundation and he was incredibly intelligent. He was a very promising young man. When we see him in the movies, he's not really that old. He's still a very young man in the prime of his life. He's sort of enjoying the publicity and the sort of like power that his company has afforded him, and sort of being like a public figure. And he's internalized a lot of this positive attention into a messiah complex, unbeknownst to even the most innermost circles of his corporate, allies, which I think are the scientists that we see throughout the Venom movie, because Carlton Drake has with him a cadre of trusted lieutenants to see his plan through, mostly scientists that either share his vision of a world utopia founded by alien organisms or are simply motivated by profit, like his head goon, Roland Treese, who is kind of in charge of his wet work operations. If people are troublesome to the Life Foundation in San Francisco, Roland is there to eliminate them. He's like the hired. He's the hired brute. He's the dragon to Carlton Drake's emperor, sort of, so to speak. So Carlton Drake has this small army of really intelligent and driven individuals working for him, and he chooses to use this power to pursue his own vision of world peace and utopia. And how does he do this? Well, as we find out in the movie, he's experimenting on individuals of a more vulnerable stature, such as the homeless, in order to see if a symbiote can bond properly with a human host. The reason he wants to do this is, of course, because of his ultimate goal of uniting symbiotes and mankind. We can assume that sometime in the Life Foundation's existence, they're a very space-oriented organization, similar to a company like, I'd say, Elon Musk's SpaceX. They encountered the symbiotes, and Drake took a huge interest in them and decided to use them to hybridize with mankind in an effort to see if they could be of assistance to the human population. Of course, he's been failing so far, and a lot of these experiments end up with the individuals affected dead. In very horrible cases, their organs are ruptured, they die very horribly and in agony, and the film's protagonist, Eddie Brock, comes into conflict with Carlton Drake through his investigation of these horrible events. Now, we're not here to discuss the story of the Venom movie. If you want to watch it, I'm sure there's like a million ways you can, whether on streaming or certain other sources that I cannot name on this channel for safety of its existence. But the point of the matter is, Carlton Drake, to summarize it, because, spoilers ahead, obviously. I mean, if you're worried about spoilers for a movie that came out in 2018, at that point, it's your problem. So, spoilers ahead, Carlton Drake bonds with a symbiote called Riot, who calls himself sort of the leader of his people. And Riot says that he will bring hordes of symbiotes to Earth, which is exactly what Carlton Drake wants, because Carlton Drake wants the evolution of mankind. So he agrees to bond with him after Riot encounters him in the host of a child he found in, I think, Malaysia, which is the origination, fun fact, of that really funny 6 months meme that you guys might have seen on Twitter and Reddit and Facebook or wherever a few months back. Anyway, so after uniting with Riot, Carlton Drake launches the Life Foundation rocket in an effort to find the symbiotes hiding out within the darkness of space and bring them back to Earth, retrieve them, as Riot says. And, together they will usher in a new golden age for mankind and symbiote alike. At least that's what he's been promised. So with that out of the way, it's very easy to think that Carlton Drake might be like the upper tiers of competency because, he did build a company from nothing. He did found a gene therapy for pancreatic cancer patients, which helped them live longer, tripled their life expectation, which is part of the movie lore, if you guys didn't know. And essentially, he was a very organized, regimental, and schedule-orientated person with a lot of control over the elements around himself. And only at the very end of the movie did he finally, meet his end. But I think it's important to recognize that he made an underhanded deal with Riot that sort of sacrificed all his worldly power, all his life foundation ambitions for this far fetched plan of bringing aliens to Earth. And we don't really know if Riot would have kept up his end of the deal. Again, on this channel, I don't like delving too much into hypotheticals when it comes to this series. I like to remain, festooned with the canon and the lore of what's established in the story. But I think with this, we really do have to examine a hypothetical of what if, so to speak, the Riot succeeded in bringing his kindred to Earth. Would they have been as cooperative as Drake had imagined? And I don't really believe so. I believe it would have been more of a hostile takeover. Now, whether Drake would have been concerned or not about this is another thing entirely, because again, Drake seemed to be very misanthropic across the movie. He makes multiple mentions of how humanity is sort of bringing about its own destruction, the typical tech billionaire detached mindset, anti humanist mindset. He tells Eddie Brock that all humans do is take, take, take. They never give to the planet. And through that vein, they're killing it, they're withering the environment away. And, this point of view has clearly led Carlton to blindly trust Riot in a lot of faculties, despite the fact that, during their conversation, when Riot and him are discussing their plans, Drake says, you know, Drake has to correct Riot because Riot says, "I will bring our people to Earth," and Drake is like, "No, we." And then Riot is just corrects himself. He's like, no, yeah, of course, we." So that leads me to debate whether Carlton would have had any free will left after the symbiotes are brought to Earth, or when Riot detected that he no longer had use for Carlton, he might have, removed him entirely. And the fact that Carlton was very desperate to find this path forward for humanity, very desperate to put himself as this messiah at the top of the pyramid of mankind and become enshrined in history as this visionary, leads me to question his competency levels a bit. It definitely makes me wonder if he would have a problem with the symbiotes acting out of order and taking over the humans, whether they wanted to or not. Again, I said earlier in the video that he probably wouldn't have, but if he did, then clearly there would be nothing he could really do about the situation, considering he was fully under Riot's thumb, and any move he made to rebel against against the organism would result in his own demise. As we see throughout the movie, when he's interrogating Eddie Brock about the location of Venom, because he wants Venom in the same way that Riot wants Venom, because Riot has convinced Carlton successfully that his ambitions and Carlton's are the same. and Eddie says that the symbiotes are slowly killing him. Carlton seems to just ignore this outright. Maybe he thought Eddie was lying, or maybe in his hubris he thought that he was special, or maybe he thought that Riot would somehow spare him from the fate of being outright slaughtered from the inside like Eddie was, being parasitized. Um, it's really anyone's guess as to what was going on through Carlton's mind through a lot of this movie. Because again, unlike a lot of other villains that I might be covering on this tier list, there's not a lot of extended lore that gives us an example of what was going on in Carlton's mind to determine his levels of competency, his intelligence, and resourcefulness and craftiness. Because, for example, let's say Palpatine, right, who I went over in the first episode of this series, there's a lot of information regarding what's going on in his mind at all times. You know, there's the Plagueis novel, which you can read, which is an amazing read, by the way. I highly recommend. There's a lot of extended universe material. There's the Revenge of the Sith novelization, which again leads you to a lot of what's going on in Palpatine's mind, his thought process, his desires, and there's a lot of Clone Wars novels. We don't really have that level of intricacy with movie versus Carlton Drake. We have, of course, the comic version, but the comic version just kind of seems to be a one-note villain who wants to destroy all the homeless and the poor people in San Francisco, and he's just a evil tech billionaire. I don't know. I'm not really into that level of the comics that much. I'm not into the Venom comics too much. Most of the information I have is garnered from the movie and from the Wikia pages I've read, and from like basically any source that I could gather. Like in like interviews with Riz Ahmed, the actor for Carlton Drake, about the character's personality and how he acts. So even with this information accumulated, I can't really tell you much about Carlton's thought process throughout the movie's events, but I can give you my best guess, which is pure hubris. Carlton thought that he was above the symbiotes and that he could control Riot or act as a partner to him, when I doubt that that was Riot's intention from the very beginning. Even if that was, as we find out in the third movie in the Venom installment franchise, Riot and his kindred were actually fleeing from Null and his xenophages. Of course, Carlton would have no way of knowing about that, so he had no way of knowing that even if he did somehow construct his symbiote utopia on Earth and everything went in the best case scenario for him, that things would be completely and utterly collapsed when Null and his minions got the Codex. Speaking of, we will go over Null in a future video, but the point of the matter is, even if Carlton could not have known about certain events, and it would be unfair to detract his competency levels based on that, he did not really question Riot enough during their brief partnership. He did not really ask enough questions, I feel like. And I know that maybe, it might be unwise because Riot will just threaten to find another host. But at the same time, Carlton has the resources and the willingness needed to achieve his goal, and it took Riot 6 months just to reach him in general. So, with that knowledge, I mean, Carlton could certainly leverage a lot of his influence and power and say, hey, I want to know more about what you're bringing to Earth. I want to know more about what you're doing to my body. I mean, like just a short scene after Eddie Brock, rebuffs him and he tells Treese to kill him, and he's just talking to Riot. Maybe he could be like, "So what's your deal, man? I mean, is what he's saying true?" And I mean, if Riot lies, at that point, I mean, maybe Carlton just thinks it's too late to turn back and he still agrees to go with them. But that would have definitely raised his competency levels just a bit for me. But whatever the case, I have detracted on the poor guy enough. Let's go over his positives. He did build the Life Foundation, which is very impressive, because as we're told in the movie, the Life Foundation is a very far-reaching corporation with huge genetic achievements. It's not just something you can write off, right? I mean, the dude is a visionary. Like, that is undeniably, objectively true. He's not just some billionaire who got lucky puffing up his achievements through stocks and, like, tweeting to his heart's content and destroying his legacy. Carlton Drake is a genuinely intelligent, genuinely dangerous individual. I mean, he's a great manager, he's a great organizer. As we can see, he has the trust of the people of San Francisco. We see that he is talking to some children throughout the movie. He has a soft spot for kids. I think we see that in the beginning of the movie when some kids are doing a tour of his facilities and he tells the kid to like explore and like always always reach for new heights, always continue to follow your dreams. That scene was something along those lines. And when Riot initially showed up to him as a child, he was very concerned for the child's safety. So I do think his concern about mankind was genuine, and that despite all his detachment, he was genuinely interested in seeing humanity evolve and not overpopulate and destroy their own home planet through the usage of the symbiotes. Whether or not that plan would have worked, again, we've already discussed that, but if his intentions were genuine, and his goals were true and he actually did pursue them to the best of his ability, I mean, that is pretty impressive. You know, Yeah, when it comes to a villain who genuinely thinks they're the hero of their own story, not a self-admitted bastard like Palpatine or maybe Carnage from Venom 2, or throughout the Venom comics, Carnage acts as Eddie Brock's arch nemesis and Venom's arch nemesis. But he's not a self-admitted bastard. He genuinely thinks that he's doing the right thing, and in that vein, his actions can be seen as the endeavors of a man trying desperately to save mankind. So when you look at it in that way, he is very competent in that he tries to keep a lot of his experiments and a lot of the knowledge of like what they do to the less fortunate of San Francisco hidden from the public because he knows, he will be torn down and his empire will crumble before his feet if people know too early on what he's doing instead of him bringing about the utopia and everyone will just bow down and be grateful to him for it. He genuinely thinks that he's bringing in this new golden age for mankind, and with him as his herald, he'll be eternally remembered as this messiah figure. When you look at villains like this, I think their intentions are much more important because um while his motivations are simple, his ideology, I think, like his desires are a very interesting thing. His motivations and his beliefs are very, understandable in a lot of ways because I mean, who hasn't had a fear about overpopulation? Who hasn't had a fear about mankind overrunning the earth and destroying everything in their wake like a pack of locusts, right? I mean, everyone, even the most humanist among us, I bet, have worried about this one time or another. So Carlton Drake merely had the resources to take action on these fears, but unfortunately he just did it in a very hasty way. And of course, during his final fight against Eddie Brock, I mean, he makes the typical movie villain mistakes of not really checking to make sure he's dead. He kind of just he moves on, and he stab. What I remember from the fight scene is that he stabs like some sharpened piece of metal through Venom, but he doesn't really do anything furthermore to check if he's still dead. He just kind of moves on without him even without even checking to see if Eddie Brock and Venom are both destroyed, and that leads to his ultimate demise. Um, so you could detract him for that, but I mean, again, I mean that happens to most villains. I mean, every movie villain has to make some predictable mistake, or else they'd win and the hero would lose, right? And Carlton Drake is no different. But with that out of the way, with what we've estimated of his character, that despite the fact that it does seem like a very simplistic tech bro, detached, sort of messiah complex individual, insulated by his own greatness and by his own achievements, by this sort of like wonder kid aura that he's built for himself, he does seem to genuinely be concerned with the future of mankind. I think we see this with his concern for children because he thinks that humanity is squandering its own future, that humanity is screwing over its future generations by not thinking of the planet, by not thinking of what comes after their own hasty consumption of all the world's available resources. And he wants to amend that in any way he can. Unfortunately, the way he does it seems very hasty. And of course, Riot could have had a huge part in manipulating him. I'm not sure if we'll ever do a video on Riot because Riot just seems like a very simplistic villain. He just wants to lead his people, conquer the world, and get ready for Null's invasion. Maybe if you guys requested enough or something, I'll go over it. But the point of the matter is, Riot could have manipulated him. He could have like got into his mind and convinced him into believing that Riot was correct. But then in that case, you have to wonder how strong his mental willpower was to allow Riot to seize that level of control over him in the first place. Villains who allow themselves to become subservient to another, to allow themselves to become controlled by another. I mean, you just gotta bring down their competency. I mean, just a little bit, right? Because I know that might just be how he's written and everything, but we have heavy hitters on this list, right? And I'm comparing Carlton Drake against these heavy hitters. I'm comparing Carlton Drake with people like Bellows, who existed for centuries, in human time anyway, and Boiling Isles time is different, but he existed for a long time, staying consistent and true to one goal. And whenever he was subservient to another person, it was only as a front until he could finally enact his own dreams and his own visions. Carlton Drake seemed to be fully ensnared by the symbiote plan, and therefore he didn't really have many independent thoughts. I think by the end of the film, by the time the fires consumed him in the rocket, he was completely just a puppet of Riot, completely just a host, like a shell for Riot. Whereas Venom and Eddie's relationship, as we could see, is genuinely symbiotic as it grows over the films, which I think is what the filmmakers were trying to convey, the contrast between them. But still, I do respect Carlton Drake's many achievements. It's not like we could just write them off either. And throughout the film, he did display capabilities to manipulate, capabilities to root out enemies within his own eternal hierarchy. When scientist Dora Skirth betrayed him. He had her fed to the symbiotes. When Eddie was going after him, he ruined the career of his fiancée, an action which had reverberations throughout the Venom trilogy because he and his fiancée Anne never really got back together after that. So he did leave a long-lasting legacy on the franchise. So with that out of the way, oh, and I mean the fact that he got Venom on the planet in the first place, I mean, that started the whole Venom franchise as well. So I mean, hmm. So that out of the way, I'm gonna put Carlton Drake, and they're all right, but still fearsome. I'm gonna put him a tier. Um, I'd say he's relatively equal to Bay vs. Megatron, but I will put him right below Bay vs. Megatron purely for the fact that he's not a cool, badass robot that can change his shape into any vehicle form he chooses, and he's just a normal man getting kind of like mind controlled by the symbiote riot. Of course, if you guys disagree, feel free. I am open to any dissenting or contrasting opinions, and I'd love to hear back from you guys about what you think about this entry and my other villain tier list episodes. If you guys like this, make sure to leave a comment, like, and subscribe, and hit the bell button for notifications. I upload pretty frequently, and I love making content for you guys. And as always, my dark siding minions, the Dark Lord bids you farewell. Peace, my friend.